I want to congratulate everybody coming to the meeting today. And right now, we'd like to go ahead and open the meeting for January the 19th for the community participation team. And we're calling that to order. And the first item we have on the agenda is adoption of the last minute's meetings. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
We have moved. Let's have a second.
Second.
Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. So passed. I'd like to open citizens' time and ask anyone if they have any, would like to speak. So we have two. Ms. Bland, do you want to go first?
I want to talk about the wisdom and necessity of really good buffers, and I mean 100-foot buffers. I think they're very important, aesthetically and environmental, and they align with what we need, I think, more of in Hanover County, which is better environmental site standards. I use as an example the Summit project south of Ashland that's being cleared, the land down there west of US 1. Now, something is going to go up there, but it's looking kind of grim right now. Most sites that are under development do. But every twig of that existing vegetation was just stripped off. I think 100-foot buffers really ought to be required. I think they should be a non-negotiable.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
In December, I had the privilege of attending a EDA meeting on economic development in general, and you're going to hear that from Mr. Thomas. I've also had the privilege of chatting with Mr. Thomas about this. After one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was we're adding a new economic development zone north of the town of Ashland, between Ashland and Doswell. I don't understand the need for that, and I oppose it. Hickory Hill is the only major road. It's a narrow through truck restriction secondary road. There's no parallel road on 95 on the east side, north of Route 54. There's nothing in the 10-year plan approved at the last Board of Supervisors meeting for improving any roads in the area. Major sewer and water infrastructure investment would be required. There's no plan or funding for another I-95 interchange to develop the area as an EEZ. Rivers and hilly topography make development challenging at best. I don't see the need, again, to establish another area like what we have south of Ashland, north of Ashland, between there and Doswell. We heard initially that citizens want park and open space in a rural field throughout Hanover. This is an area which would be excellent for a major county park, and open space should be preserved here. I don't believe that at this time that area should be identified as an economic development zone. And I respectfully ask consensus from the CPT and the members of the Planning Commission for that result. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Ms. Smith?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I appreciate it. And also thank you for allowing citizens to have input at this time through all of the various methods Andrew has provided. I really appreciate that. He really has done an outstanding job getting our word out and being able to. I know that I have discussed with several people about the small amount of people that have participated, but he certainly has put his foot out there to make it available to people. In particular of interest is a particular parcel of land that I own, but also from the standpoint of looking at it in the whole scope of Hanover County. And first I'd like to say it is a piece of property that my family has owned for over 60 years. It is right at the edge of the Beaver Dam District and Ashland. And it has been in the comp plan for years to be commercial. It's not just my property. I may have said at one point in time, my property is for the plan of commercial, but it's also that entire area right there at that corner of Route 54 East Patrick Henry Highway and Woodside Lane. Across Eric Wells from Northern Virginia is looking at development. Certainly I have studied and researched. I know Noah can share more on this, everything that's coming through there and changes with the road improvements as well. One thing that I think is needed for the county is to maintain that revenue. And at one point in time, a lot of people been in the county for a long time thought this is going to become a bedroom community and we've got to keep revenue coming in from other sources. That area is right there at what my son tells me is the golden triangle. It is 295, 95, 64. And we've got to generate all the revenue we can. We are fortunate. Traveling, looking at farms, looking at things, I see there are a lot of counties that would love to have 95 come through for them. And being 5/10 of a mile from 95, that revenue is sitting right there. That is so potential. Again, I mentioned Eric Wells. Mr. Shia also owns property there that is in line for development. Hank Wilton is also working with a landowner to develop there. Also right at 95, there's an explosion of development going there, and I'm not going to go into it. That is Ashland. The other point that I wanted to make is, in that area, there's over 1,100 acres of rural conservation, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember the other one. It's the rule where you put it around the developments, tax developments. I want to say it's RS. That's a lot of land. Over 1,100 acres just in that area. Imagine if you do that all over in equalization of areas in other places in the county. You're letting a lot of land sit, and it's not all being farmed. I will say I'm glad that Wakey's farming some of the land. Okay. And last, I'd like to say, it makes sense. It's a prominent location. It's an intersection of one that does not always exist for communities, for counties to prosper. And it's an access for people to get in and out quickly, being right there, 5/10 from 95. Again, I appreciate you allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anybody else? Mr. Ashton?
Brad Ashley, I live in the Beaver Dam District. My passion is and always has been the acquisition of large parcels of land for public use. I've been to most all of your Envision Hanover meetings, and every time, every sticky note, every board, the public continues to tell you we need land for public parks and trails. I don't know how many times they have to tell you that. And what's the plan for the acquisition of land for public parks? Well, since the onset of the Parks Department in 1976, absolutely nothing. There's been no lands, there's no land purchased with the allocation of capital money from the board, with the exception of a referendum that the voters passed. The voters passed to purchase Pole Green Park. Now, I've seen Mrs. Morrison, a member of our community in the Ashland District, come forward and try to give you a park. But you wouldn't even accept the park on a 3-3 vote. A park for therapeutic handicap horseback riding for children. You wouldn't even accept it. And what was the reasoning for that? The reasoning was because in the comprehensive plan, you can't divide preservation land or conservation land. I own preservation land with my family. I do not want to divide it. I don't want to sell an inch of it. But that land is abundant. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of that. Your predecessors actually got this right back in the last century when they talked about cluster developments, where the homes are all in the cluster and the remainder of the land is then set forth as preservation. No density, preservation. The problem they made, or the mistake they made, is they allowed it to be divided as many times as could be. And that was ridiculous, and it was wrong. And then the board came back years later and saw that, and they made a worse mistake. They said you can't divide it at all. So someone like Ms. Morrison that's trying to give you property for a public park and you deny it, can't do that because she didn't want to give you her home and her preservation land. She can't split it. On a personal note, I wanted to give the well to the manor house that's adjacent to my property, just give it to them for a historic place. I couldn't even give them the property. So I worked through Mr. Maloney, and we worked out a situation where we made a trade. Very expensive, but it happened. When I was with the Parks Department, I went to the community, but before I did that, I went to the planning department. I leaned on them desperately to help me identify public properties in Hanover County, and they did so. And what I did was simply coordinate that with the people that wanted parks. All of your football leagues, all of your soccer leagues, your equestrian groups, your mountain bike riders, Mr. Bob Bailey, Todd Rogers, Mike Sinal, Doug and Carol Barton, the list goes on. These are the people that built your parks. And from my point of view, it's embarrassing that a county of this size hasn't taken the initiative to look forward to purchase large tracts of land for the public for the future. In 100 years, your broadband will be an 8-track tape player. All of your schools and what you have now, the sticks and bricks, will be different. Your public health will be different. All of your public safety will probably come from the sky, or at least a lot of it. Things will change. Things that seem important now maybe won't be in 100 years. But I guarantee you what won't change. If you don't acquire large tracts of public land for future generations, they're going to consider all of us nothing more than a ship of fools. This is our opportunity to do so. I would say to you that taking a visit for the existing preservation land, and when you get new communities, cluster the housing, do what your predecessors set forward, and take that land and consider that as a profit for public parks immediately or future public division for parks. I think the ruling of not being able to divide that land for the public good is absolutely ridiculous, and there is no plan for public parks, and I hope you'll consider that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ashley. Anyone else like to speak? Seeing none, we'll close citizens' time. We're on a tight schedule as well because we have a planning commission meeting after this, so we're going to try to keep it moving as best we can. Ms. Pompey, I'm going to turn it over to you for the organization.
We'll move on to the presentations. We have 2 presentations from staff. The first presentation will be from Mr. Linwood Thomas, who's our Economic Development Director, and the second presentation will be from Steve Herzog, who's our Public Utilities Director. And the reason that they're coming to these presentations is that they will be addressing some of the topics within the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is comprehensive, it addresses land use, historic resources, economic development, community facilities, all these different components of what makes a community great. And the work they're doing directly influences land use, which we've been discussing and will be discussing at public meetings coming up. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Thomas.
I wanted to share a little bit with you all about my background because this is actually the first time I've ever spoken to the CPT and also, believe it or not, the Planning Commission in the 6 years that I've been here. So a little bit about my background. I actually come from an agricultural background. My former boss was the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture for Bush 1, and I got my start in the Fredericksburg region under him. His name was Eugene F. Bailey. And was in economic development in the Fredericksburg region for almost 10 years, where I cut my teeth, and this opportunity came about. And what was attractive to me about Hanover was their land use model. Keeping a majority of the county rural, I like that. This is my community too. But when I took the job, my feedback is for us to keep the majority of the county rural, we have to be competitive in that 22% of the county. So this was an attractive job for me for some of those reasons. We may not be as far apart on some of these things. I've heard some of the comments today. Mr. Nelson, no one ever comes to meet with me anymore and says it's a pleasure to meet with you. I wish they did. You go into economic development because you want it to be fun. You go into economic development to help your community in a healthy, sustainable way. Recently, it's been a little bit of a tough slog, and I think everybody would agree to that. But there are a lot of points that you make that I think I want to tie into my presentation today. And I wanted to really start by sharing with the citizens the goal for us. And we want to develop good projects in the areas that the county has said they want to grow. And I thought I'd start off by saying, how do we provide the citizens what you want and not just take what we get? We've heard a lot of feedback about we don't like distribution facilities, we don't want any more trucks. It's good feedback. And we had some of these conversations, Bob, when you and I sat down and met, and there is a way to attract the best uses for these properties, but it's going to take investment, it's going to take vision. Steve, would you hand me that master plan real quick, if you don't mind? It's going to take master planning. I'm going to pass this around in just a few minutes, but there is a path forward. What I thought I might do is start to share with you all a little bit of the role of our department in economic development. You learn very quickly that, and you may have heard me say this before, my grandmama used to say, you dance with the one who brung you. And at the end of the day, small business and the support for our small businesses is what we do. That's number one, that's paramount. The big announcements, they're sexy, they're great for the tax base, but if we don't support our small businesses, we're not going to be successful as practitioners of economic development. The other thing is, and I probably should have underscored this, but we implement long-term county policies around economic development. The key word is implement. We don't create those. We'd like to think we have a seat at the table to discuss those, but it's the board working in conjunction with the departments that really set the policies. So we just implement the policies. And we drive those policies, but we're not developing those policies. So I think that's an important note. I actually wish we had a little more say in some of the decisions that are made. Maybe you all say, well, maybe we don't wish you had a little more say. But at the end of the day, we only implement those policies. One of our goals is to market those key sites and buildings and property in the county that the board has identified, the county has identified, including in the suburban services area, in those EDZs, economic development zones, that are sync up with the county's comprehensive plan. We also identify strategic sites in the suburban services area and those EDZs, where appropriate, consider rezonings and the utilization of grant funding to advance those sites. For those who may not understand the site analysis, site tiering, for us to attract major users, we must eliminate risk from some of these properties that are already zoned or in those areas we want to develop for commercial industry. And so we've got to get those properties to a point where it eliminates risk. So that involves investing in infrastructure, that involves investing in studies like wetlands delineations, like geotechnical work. So we have to do that work up front to make a more competitive site for major corporate investment. We also work directly with site consultants and brokers and landowners. We build relationships with them because they touch a lot of the major corporate investment, both nationally and internationally, all over the world. We try to educate citizen groups and the community. As Hanover has such a great story to tell, I think you all realize that, and I'll share some of those in just a moment. Some of the reasons why companies choose Hanover as a destination, these probably are no secret to most of you, but it's important to note a few of these have changed over the last few years, but priority still continues to be on strategic location and competitive workforce. Market proximity is critical, and we have such a great story to tell there. Companies are going to go somewhere else if you don't have property that's zoned and of the proper size, right? So it's got to fit their long-term strategies around development and growth. And the risk has been eliminated along with infrastructure. If we don't have that in those areas, we will not compete. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute to show you the projects that we've lost in industry sectors which I would consider a much better return than distribution alone because of the type of use. I want to highlight this because this is something that in the last 7 years we've seen come to the forefront. Companies want to feel like their employees will be welcomed. The drain for talent, the need for talent is so critical that they don't care who you love, they don't care the color of your skin, they want to find the best people for these jobs. And since it's so competitive to find the right workers, this is an area that we've seen rise to the forefront. If it's a company that's relocating from Silicon Valley or Phoenix, or for that matter, Germany, they want to come to a community where they feel like that their employees can thrive and succeed and feel welcome. And that is really something, don't take my word for that, that's some of the top site consultants that work with some of the top Fortune 1000 companies all over the world. That's something that we've seen kind of move up on the list of importance over the last 5 to 7 years. And then quality of life. I use the example of a spouse of a CEO, and this is just one example because I can use it, some are confidential, but when I was in the Fredericksburg region, we worked to relocate the American Canoe Association. It's a small outfit, a nonprofit, but there were 3 other locations they were looking at. One was in North Carolina, and one was in South Carolina, and they were looking to be in a place that had a great quality of life, good schools. But at the end of the day, all of the locations they had picked were relatively competitive. They thought that they could go to any of those. And at the end of the day, the CEO's spouse made the decision because of some of these factors. So we have this story too. Quality of life is so important. People want good schools, healthcare, safety, and amenities, and we have all those here. So we check most of those boxes. So if you look at all of these, we hit most of these reasons why people would want to locate here. And just to kind of marry what we had just shown you, we have such great market proximity to 95, 295, 64. We're within a couple hours of 2 international, actually we're within a couple hours of 3 international airports if you include Richmond. They kind of put Richmond on that list. I'm not quite sure it's a hub for international travel. But we were close to the Port of Virginia, which continues to make expansions. The cost to do business here is just so favorable, low regulations. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Well-run government. Companies want to come to communities that manage their finances well. And so obviously we're AAA bond rated and have been for some time, but that fiscal stability is really important. And then I touched on quality of life. So we sync up with the majority of factors that site selectors are looking at when making a final decision. I will say that this job can be an economic developer's dream because we check all those boxes. You would love to do economic development in Hanover County because of all of those reasons. So a couple of challenges that we have, actually, these are big challenges, and we have to look at them and we have to at least face them and address them. We hardly have any greenfield sites that have not been touched, that are in the Virginia Business Sites Readiness Program as a Tier 3 or above. Can I just see a show of hands of who knows the tiering system, the Virginia Business Sites Readiness? I see you back there, Nora. A few people, 3 or 4 people. Okay, so let me quickly give you that. The Cliff Note version is a 1 is a piece of dirt that hasn't been touched, no infrastructure in place, no studies done. A 5 is a pad-ready site that's ready to go for a prospect shows up tomorrow, it's zoned, it has infrastructure in place. 5 is the most competitive. What we have found is if we can't get them to at least a 3, we don't eliminate enough risk for companies trying to make a decision on a corporate relocation on a greenfield site, piece of dirt. We only have 1 site in the region, and by the way, I'm going to show you the map. Do they have their PowerPoint slides with them, Joanne? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you a slide in a minute that does not include the Holland Excel site, and I see Nora in the back. But the town has the only, and I told Nora I was going to pick on her today. I had to do it. The town has the only. It's a Tier 4 now, Tier 4 site in Hanover County. It's one of the best sites under 300 acres in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's the only site in Hanover that is truly competitive for a major economic development project right now over 50 acres. Let me say that. So we don't have any product to market. I got to give the town credit too, because you're going to hear me talk about the importance of master planning in a minute. I'm going to pass this around. But not only do we need to zone the properties where we've identified for growth, we need to master plan them. You talked about parks back here. Economies of scale, if we identify enough property, we can build those plans into these larger parks. We can build in plans for a fire station or a police station. So there is a bigger goal in all of this other than just to develop sites for economic development. I got a chance to view the Intel, where the Intel project is going up in Ohio. It's fascinating. Their industrial parks look like technology parks. They have walking paths, they have trails, they have soccer fields. They have white picket fences. Yes, their industrial parks have white picket fences. So there is a way to do this right where it's aesthetically appealing too, and it provides for public consumption as well. You want to pass that around, and maybe I don't know if anybody's. I'm happy to send that to you via email as well if anybody's interested in getting a copy of it. We need to develop strategies around our EDZs. So when I say that, it's one thing to identify them on the map, but it really doesn't get us anywhere, and it confuses developers, because if we don't have a plan, and I know Steve's going to talk about infrastructure, it's critically important. If we don't have a plan to get the infrastructure there long term, now we eat the elephant one bite at a time. I'm not advocating for spending $300 million on getting infrastructure to every one of our EDs, but if we don't have a plan for that, then really those sites are just, they're circles on a map. That's all it equates to. So we also have to have that plan. I mentioned that. Critical investments in infrastructure in those designated zones to support economic development. And then as we pass around that master plan, we should be identifying bigger uses than just we want an industrial site for an industrial building. What does it look like if we developed a technology park? We could proffer out distribution as a primary use. We wouldn't have to have distribution necessarily. Now, if you make something, let's be honest, you're going to have to distribute it. So you would always need distribution. Well, you wouldn't always. You could develop a data center park. They're green, they're clean, they're quiet. So you could put walking trails through them. So we can develop economic development projects that fit in with the ecosystem as well, other than just big box warehousing. You know, this is an area that we've seen a lot of challenges recently, and this is a way we can preserve our suburban services area longer by identifying areas. And it's not a lot of areas. I think density gets a four-letter word sometimes, but there are areas near interchanges and near, I use Bon Secours Memorial Regional as an example. There are places that young professionals would like to live. They can't afford, I think the median average house right now is $615,000 new sale. New sales average price was $1,617,000. I think a used home was like the average of $429,000. Even your firefighters, even nurses to some degree, your first responders, those who educate, teachers, they cannot afford a house here. And so identifying some areas next to industry, next to businesses, where density makes sense, it gives us a way to preserve our suburban services area. We can grow our suburban services area and preserve those rural areas much longer. And believe it or not, density does not always bring crime. It does not. Actually, if anything, it gives people more of a purpose and entitlement to work hard. It actually is, the studies have been done, if done in the right place, again, that it's actually a way to help give people a sense of meaning and to help people who work in our communities have a place they call home. I'm going to toggle back and forth between these two slides for a minute. I wanted to show you, and kudos to Joanne for coming back and putting some more context in her team, because Joanne, we know we don't do it on our own, do we? God knows. We got good teams, and I know Andrew's been part of this, but putting some more context around our economic development zones, because I think it's important that we put a little more meat on those. And so yes, we've identified, I'm sorry, did you have a question? I apologize. We've identified some of our emerging employment hubs in green. These are areas that we've identified, not just in the short term, Mr. Nelson, but in the long term. Where are these emerging areas that could be? We don't think, like, for example, the Hanover Progress is an area that, and Steve's going to tell you the same thing, that we could get infrastructure to in a very short period of time. But if we don't identify these emerging zones now, what's going to happen is you're going to have growth regardless. Either we plan it and we build strategies around it long term in the suburban services area, not outside of it, or what we're going to do is we're going to have people building residential developments in and around these areas that are really ideal for economic development long term. So we've got to make sure we identify those today as opposed to wait, because 5 years from now or 10 years from now, it's too late to identify those. Established employment hubs, most of those have been developed. Probably most of the employment hubs, about 85% of those are developed. Renewal areas, most of those are developed, but need some strategy around overlays and long-term redevelopment. I call them, some of those are brownfields. How do we redevelop these corridors to make them aesthetically appealing? Sometimes you look at grants that are available, matching grants at both the state and the local level. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to toggle to this next slide real quick, and I want to kind of give you an idea of economies of scale, and I'm going to scroll back. But for those who don't know, there's 640 acres in a square mile. There's 474 square miles in Hanover, which equates to about 303,000 acres of land. If the suburban services area makes up 22% of that, or 104 square miles, you've got 66,500 plus acres in the suburban services area, okay? Give or take, okay, rough math here. The emerging employment hubs, let's just say, and I've been pretty progressive in this. I wasn't conservative. I wanted to make sure no one said, well, you're being too conservative there. No, these circles that we've made are bigger than the circles that are on the map, because we want to make sure that we were more aggressive than more conservative. 5,760 acres of areas that we've proposed that are emerging. Those are most likely undeveloped. 80% of those are not zoned, so we don't have zoning for it, and no infrastructure. So the challenge long-term is even that is going to be an uphill climb, but we're going to have to eat that elephant one bite at a time. Established employment hubs make up about 3,300 acres. 85% of those are developed, and most of the remaining property is very small in nature. So you're doing really small business infill development with those type of areas. And then renewal areas, most of those are developed too, but really just need corridor improvements, grants, redevelopment, and overlays. How do we want that corridor to look coming into Hanover County moving forward? Do we want to develop an overlay that requires people who purchase property to build or develop a set of aesthetically appealing architectural designs for these areas? What are those goals in those renewal areas? To address Mr. Nelson, we've proposed the elimination of 2 EDZs that total about 2,400 acres, and I'm going to back up here for a second. The area next to the Wegman site, we've proposed eliminating, and I believe the Hylas tract, which is approximately 2,200 acres. So we proposed actually eliminating 2 of those and adding 1. So it would really be almost a net neutral. If we call it fair, it's about 200 additional acres total that we're adding to those EDZs that we've identified. So this is almost a net neutral. We're getting rid of 2, we're proposing, and by the way, this has not been approved, so at the end of the day, this is just proposed, full disclosure, and we're adding 1. So it's not, a huge gain. And then to kind of break it down, we have and this is a good thing. It's good that we have a conservative land use practices. I love that, but let's be honest. If you add all 3 of those zones together, and a majority of that has either been developed or is nowhere near ready to be developed, it equates to about 11,760 acres, which even those areas only make up about 17% of our suburban services area. So the truth is we aren't trying to grow too fast. We're trying to identify strategic areas and zones that we've said we can be competitive. And then we've got to get the right strategies in place. So you may ask, well, what industry should we target and can we realistically win? Because we don't want any more distribution. Stop bringing us projects. Well, at the end of the day, a lot of these properties have been zoned for many years and it's by right. So it's not Linwood Thomas and his team driving distribution. Actually, if you ask me, return on investment wise, distribution isn't the best use of many of these properties, so we can find better uses. So what have we been seeing? We didn't start codifying and tracking this stuff till about 3 years ago. I've been here about 6, but I realized 3 years in, man, we really need to start to show the public what we're losing, why we're losing it, and how can we attract better projects. So what we started to do was track this stuff. And we have about a 6-page document that breaks down every project we've lost, the capital investment, of the creation of jobs that these projects would create, the annual average wage the project would create, and then why we lost it. Because I wanted to know, well, I need to make a case for why we're losing these projects and how do we become more competitive. Some of the projects we've lost, we could have won a Plenty project in Chesterfield. We could have at least competed for that project. That's a vertical farm. It was a $300 million project. It's quiet, it's green, it's clean, minimal traffic. The Chesterfield Lego project, we submitted a site for that, but it didn't have the right infrastructure in place. Pharmaceutical manufacturing, we don't have the water infrastructure, the redundancy. We've lost pharma projects because we don't have the infrastructure. Advanced manufacturers, data centers, semiconductors. I'm not naive to think we're going to land a $10 billion semiconductor manufacturer, though we did compete for one. Actually, they looked at the Holland XL site in the town. We didn't have the right infrastructure. But we are seeing these type of projects, automotive and food processing. The one area that we could compete with almost any project internationally if they're looking for an East Coast operation, any project. So we could actually have the cream of the crop. We could have our pick. If we've got the right sites and the right infrastructure in place, we can pick what projects we want because we can be exclusive. Now, this is where the relationship with a landowner comes in because right now we don't own property. So we can't really control it, but so much other than we can control the zoning and those uses that the county either has to make exceptions for. But at the end of the day, this is where there's some tools that we could find and develop in our toolbox that could make us more competitive. we're not going to attract a lot of major office users. First of all, the office market has changed so much. The Owens of the Miners, the Capital Ones, a majority of their young professionals are working from home. A lot of these office buildings throughout the region, I don't want to say are vacant, but they're underutilized, and we're not going to see that return in the short term, and Hanover's not going to compete for major office users. But everything else we can compete against. And when I say you don't have to take my word for it, since 19, we've lost $69 billion in tangible projects. Don't take my word for it, we've got a sheet. We've lost them, totaling about 31,000 jobs, okay? These are good paying jobs in most of these high paying industry sectors. If we only landed, because I'm not realistic to think we would have landed every one of them, we're not that good, but if we would have only landed 10% of those projects, that equates to about $9.6 billion and 3,100 jobs. 31,000 is what we lost. We lost 3,100 too. But at the end of the day, we could have won at least 10% of those projects, at least 10% of them, if we had the sites in the areas that the county has determined they want to grow and we had the right infrastructure there. That's pretty powerful, actually. I mean, that's how much revenue is that? I could probably spin it off on top of my head, at least $100 million a year in new revenue to the county. There goes your school, or there goes, you know, an elementary school and a middle school. But we have to be able to provide effective economic development because it's one of the few departments, components of local government that actually can pay for itself if done effectively. Just a couple of strategies, and I'm going to take some questions. I know my time is fleeting, but EDZs that are put on a map, there should be a strategy to invest in those. We shouldn't just put them as circles. We've got to invest in even if it's 5 or 4 or 3, wherever we identify, we've got to also invest long-term in the infrastructure to make them competitive. And then we need to master plan them. We need to tell the community what we want there. Patty, you mentioned buffers. Yeah, the bigger the site, we can put we can build necessary buffers and approve. No one will ever see it. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to develop a 10-acre piece of property, it's harder for the developer to swallow that than it is if you're trying to develop 300 or 400 acres where you can build the necessary buffers in, get the right infrastructure, then you've got the economies of scale. We might as well not have EDZs if we're not going to invest in the infrastructure to attract the right type of projects. In the redevelopment zones, we really also need strategies about those overlays and the ability for the county will have to use a little bit of resources and funding to get those matching grants that we can utilize to redevelop those corridors that may not look necessarily aesthetically appealing or that we want to attract better users. At the end of the day, if we invest a little bit of money, those properties are going to be worth more, and so we're going to generate more tax revenue long term from them. So it really makes sense to identify those and then invest. I touched on the mega sites, but the larger the site, the more ability you have to incorporate those other things like parks or like walking trails or things that benefit the community. I never like to use Chesterfield and Henrico as examples because I know at times, but we always like to take the meat and throw out the bones. There's times that the things they've done really work. You look at some of the sites they've master planned them to include those public, some of those public needs that we have, like fire stations and police and walking trails and parks. So we don't have to look too far in the areas that we've identified to develop master plans that could work. Our Economic Development Authority, I was hoping to have somebody from the EDA here today, but they can be a vehicle for us, partnering with the board to secure options on property. We had an economic, we had a program that basically would allow, the Strategic Zoning Initiative would allow land users to rezone their property and we'd hold the rollback taxes on that property until we found an end user. That program probably needs some more meat on the bone. What I will tell you is the EDA could secure an option on a piece of property, and then we could determine long-term what we wanted to go there. With citizen input, we could get citizen feedback, citizen engagement, and then determine with citizen feedback what we wanted to go there because we have an option on it. We don't even have to buy it. We would control its own destiny. So I don't think we should exclude the EDA from future conversations because they have tools that the Board of Supervisors and the county don't have. And then lastly, we're going to have to spend some money. We spend it, and let me make clear, I know where we stand in the pecking order, but so it's going to be education and our first responders, and then even social services. But if we spend money on those things, at some point to get what we want, we're going to have to spend some money. And that's the challenging part, because we can't just sit back and say, well, we don't want distribution. We don't want distribution. We're going to have to get the appropriate land uses in place, proffer that out where it makes sense, and then work to get the right infrastructure in place so we can compete for the projects that we want to win. So I'm going to stop there, and do I have a few minutes for questions? I tried to mow through it so we had some time for questions, because I think that's so important.
So I was just curious when you're talking about the investment up front. So when we look at other counties that are smaller scale than ours, obviously have less tax revenue there, so just based on population piece, I mean, how are they making this work? So take like a Berry Hill in Pennsylvania County, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did they make that work with and maybe, I'm not asking to speak about other counties. I'm just saying,
I will.
looking at what other counties have done, because obviously that's always the balance, right, when you're trying to put money into things. So is there any consideration of that as far as other counties, I guess, that we want to, you mentioned Chesterfield and Henrico, but just trying to strike that balance, I guess.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, because there are also rural localities doing great things, and Pennsylvania is one of them. The Ford project and all that went on with down there recently is sure devastating for that community. I'll just say that. I'll leave my political opinions out of it. But smaller jurisdictions, it's so much harder. It's harder for the King George and the Pennsylvania counties to do economic development than it is for us, because we do have more resources. And then it's harder for us to do economic development than it is for the Henricos and Chesterfields, because they have so much money. But here's what they did down there, and they developed a RIFA. And I don't know if we've got the foresight to develop that. That's a regional industrial fund. This is where having your elected officials all pulling in the same direction from multiple jurisdictions, it's not always easy, but they developed a RIFA where they're funding the investment of this site because they know the value for their community. They're not as blessed as we are. They don't have as many opportunities. So they say, for us to compete, we're going to have to control our own destiny. We're going to have to develop a RIFA. We're going to have to invest in the infrastructure, because we can get a pad-ready site, but if we don't get the right infrastructure there, the right type of end user is not going to come. And so it is more challenging, but in a way, I don't want to say they're desperate, but they're more needy of major economic development for their local citizens. So they've taken that initiative to figure it out. And I think that it is a good example of an area, in a rural area of Virginia, that I was at an event recently with Todd Haymore, former Secretary Haymore, and then former Secretary Ball, who indicated that regional and local cooperation is so critical to getting anything done. If you don't have the political will or horsepower to do it, you really can't get it done, and they figured it out.
Right. That was kind of the premise of my question, because I just don't understand like who our allies are, I guess, or who are we trying to be like. So you mentioned maybe not Henrico and Chesterfield, which being a rural person, I would agree with you.
I do know your background, by the way. Yes.
But I was just curious, like, who do we work with in that space? Because, you have our bordering counties, which are either very rural or very suburban. So that kind of puts us in a very,
I have inside information of some of the other more rural jurisdictions like Louisa, Andy Wade in Louisa, Economic Development Director, Gary Wilson in Caroline. They're going to win some big projects. The reason they're going to win some big projects is because their boards, the county as a whole, have determined that for them to win deals, they're going to have to invest. And so they've taken tens of millions of dollars and appropriated for investments in the projects like data centers. You may see a data center announcement, which is huge. They're green, they're clean, there's not a lot of trucks, there's no trucks, there's very few cars. But you're going to see some of these more rural jurisdictions saying, for us to compete, we're going to have to invest. So it's local political will too, to have the vision and foresight to make those investments. Does that make sense? I mean, you get it. You see it all over the state, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the question.
We have a lot of economic development zones in the county that are on the map, but we don't have infrastructure there. I mean, you hit on that. What do we need to do to get infrastructure there? What are our options? And my only question is, we don't even have anything in the 20-year plan for that. What happens if we do nothing?
Great, and Steve's gonna punch me, so I gotta be I'm gonna take a step over here for a second. I do not want him to punch me, but at the end of the day, the short answer is if we wanted to go to Mars, there's areas that it would still be hard to get infrastructure there in 5, 10, 15 years. But if we don't go at all, and we don't, Larry, to your point, if we don't identify these zones and we don't start making these investments incrementally, we're already behind the curve. So what we should do is identify what are those lower hanging areas that we can get infrastructure to in the mid to short term, and then what are those longer areas like Hanover Progress? Maybe that's 20 years away. Steve will probably tell you at least that. But at the end of the day, how can we start to invest? Because if we do nothing, to your point, we're going to see development in these zones in the suburban services area, not pushing outside the suburban service area, but we're going to see residential. People are going to buy lots and they're going to develop agricultural uses on those lots, which is fine, and they're going to develop residential uses on those lots. So then we'll eventually box out any of those zones that we've identified, because what will happen is I'll say it, we'll build in our opposition. People will say, well, we don't want growth here. You may have identified it, but you never really identified it, and you never really told us. This is where sometimes confusion comes, because there'll be a site that's zoned, and I think we're working hard as a county to be more transparent in those areas. But if we don't truly tell the citizens today that this is an area we're going to grow in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what's going to happen is and we don't identify it and then try to develop strategies around it, like a Berry Hill. Is it Berry Farm or Berry Hill? Berry Hill, yeah. Then we're going to basically take what we get as opposed to having the strategy. So doing nothing is going to be catastrophic.
One other question I have. I think we have a general consensus with the planning commission and the participation team that we do not want to expand the suburban service area. Having said that, what do we do to make what we have more efficient?
Yeah, so thank you. And for the record, I am not for expanding the suburban services area. I think what we've said is that we can be efficient in that next 20 plus years if we identify those areas. If we do look at density in some areas, around interchanges, around areas that we have master planned, a little bit of residential in areas with parks and with a technology park and with businesses, there are places it makes sense. It keeps us more competitive longer, and it allows us to keep that rural character of the county, much longer as well. So the short answer is we've got to be more efficient in the suburban services areas so we can maintain that 78% plus that's rural. We have to. I mean, it's simple. If you don't, what you'll have is the small amount of property, and some may not say a small, but 22%, the very conservative area that we've identified, will grow much faster without a true plan.
I'm glad I get to go third because you took half my thunder there. I had a question about Hylas. Why were you taking that off? Why were you deciding that?
Let me make clear, I am not taking anything off or adding anything, but let me go back to the,
So staff made that recommendation, that many of those areas where it covers is already covered by large-scale residential development. A lot of them are like 5 to 7 acre lots. The assessments of those areas are very high. I think it would be very difficult to put a large tract of land together in that area.
Okay. Does that include 33 and 295?
No.
You still 33 is still right here, so we still got this mountain corridor. That's been identified for some time. It's an emerging
I was
zone.
lumping it together.
Yeah,
so
this is more like Dude Ranch Drive and different things like that. It's really cut up pretty strongly.
But that makes my point. To the point, if we don't identify some areas, they're going to be extremely cut up with just residential.
So that's what happens if we do nothing.
Correct. That's one of the examples. Yeah. Thank you.
The next question I have is north of Ashland there, that emerging employment hub.
Yes, sir.
How big is that plot approximately?
We've actually identified it, and I've been a little more aggressive. It's probably less, but it's about almost 2,700 acres.
2,700?
And by the way, if you look at Mr. Nelson's already done his research, probably 50% of that is not developable. A lot of it's wet.
Right.
So when we start looking at it, we've identified it because it's in an area that we feel like we haven't seen a lot of residential growth. It's also in the northern part of that zone is where Old Ridge Road is, which we've got Cascade, our cardboard container board company, and we've got some other property that's zoned accordingly. And it has been in our comp plan for planned business in the past.
And do we need more infrastructure? And when you say infrastructure, are we just talking water to sewer? Are we talking high voltage? Power, or what are we missing these opportunities from?
Steve will correct me, but I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and probably $100 million plus in infrastructure, including transportation, but I mean, roads. I mean, at some point you'll have to have a vision for a flyover, but here's the thing. The governors are appropriating a ton of money. Most recently, Berry Hill, Chesterfield. The governor, through the Virginia Business Sites Readiness Program, has appropriated $200 million, just recently given $90 million of it away. There is a way, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but there is a way to work in partnership. Now again, I'm not naive to think it's going to come tomorrow, but if we can identify the zones, then we can qualify for these grants. We're also going to have to be willing to put a little money into it. But it's not as daunting as if we have partners. And if we've identified them, then it makes us. See, the communities that already took advantage of those dollars, those infrastructure dollars, those dollars that are appropriated for studies, they were already ready to go. They had their master plan done, like the town, and they said, this is what we want. So that's why we have to get these properties to a point where we can actually compete for some of these dollars, because they're out there. They're federal dollars right now that we could take advantage of, actually, too.
Well, I can sit there and ask questions all afternoon, but I'll let the other people talk. Go ahead.
Thank you, Linwood, for coming out today. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
I got 3 questions I want to ask. I'm pretty sure you've hit all around, but I'm going to ask you again.
Yes, sir.
In what ways does the economic development attract business? And what are the stumbling blocks you find that we compete with other counties?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is we could have won many of these other projects, data centers. I mean, Facebook, probably not, but QTS, we could have won. Lego, we actually submitted the Excel site for Lego, but it didn't configure. The challenge is the economies of scale, the size of the property, zoned, infrastructure in place. We've got the workforce. I mean, we've got a strong workforce. Our labor market is strong, and actually our labor market is more competitive than some of the other. We're competing against Raleigh, we're competing against Nashville. Our wages are more competitive here, which makes it more attractive for companies. So there are some of the things that the biggest challenges, again, are zoning, local will to get the property zoned and get the infrastructure there. That's the main challenge. That's why we're losing most of them.
I think you basically answered all the 2. Okay.
There you go.
Go ahead.
So, this probably, I know the EBZs that you're pulling out, the yellow shaded areas are just proposed at this point, right?
Yes.
And we were in a meeting with Ms. Dibble where we talked about the one out there, the area, and back when it was kind of developed as a residential, fairly large block of land. I would submit, and it doesn't look right on that map, is that right up in the middle of that green blob, if you drive down Taylorsville Road, you will see a section of the county that looks equal to the section over in the Barrington area that you tried to take out of some of this. So I don't think it's quite as simple as putting a big round circle north of Ashland. I think you've got to drive through there and look at it. I think there's some sections of that area that are old Hanover, old homes, and have been there since before any of us have been.
And to your point, there's some people in those sections that don't even want to sell. So I mean, we're,
You're not
but
gonna get it anyway, but if you go in all around them, you're going to make it a very pleasant place.
the reason I disagree with you there is because, and I did say the infrastructure is critical. Hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure to make that competitive. That's why the long-term strategy is so important. It's that we're not going to do it in the short term, but if done right, you can build, like Patty mentioned, you can build the necessary buffers. You've got big enough swaths of property in there where you can actually.
I agree with
Yeah.
you. I mean, you haven't said anything I disagree
Yeah.
with, but I just, when I look at this proposal over in the Barrington area, and I drive through the area north of Ashland,
Fair.
I don't see any different than that. Okay, it looks to me the same. So if whatever the criteria is that we're going after the removal on these others, you got to apply it equally across the whole county.
Don't tell anybody, but I didn't want the Hylas track taken off either. But it does make sense. But it does make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We discussed it, and it made sense.
Yeah.
Under the
Yeah.
circumstances. So it's
This
just,
these are staff recommendations.
Yeah.
Linwood, we presented to the EDA, but, it was, we went for a drive with Linwood, we reviewed all these. He shouldn't get the pressure.
no.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I'm fine with pressure.
Probably drive down Taylorsville Road and have the same conversation.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at it again.
Thank you.
I've got several. Hold me to a question.
If y'all would have me back more often, I could maybe just a few, nobody wants to hear from your economic development director. No, go ahead. Shoot.
Rollback program for the real estate taxes, more information on that, and what was it, more details, please.
Well, I'll try to give you the Cliff Note version. The Strategic Zoning Initiative was created before I arrived because the county in the past has not believed in owning property, having options on property. The board, the county has said, we don't want to compete with the private sector. Many jurisdictions, even smaller, like the one I came from, would own property so we could control its destiny. But we've got to use taxpayer dollars, so there's a sensitivity there. I recognize that. The other was the option. We still control it. We negotiate with the landowner. I'm going to get to the strategic zoning, but there's a couple of things that I think are important that tie into that. We don't have to own it. We have an option on it. We pay the landowner, let's just say it's $20,000 a year. We control it. We determine what the use is, and we actually negotiate up front with the landowner what the sales price is. So when we bring a prospect, one that we want, one that the county has identified as a high return value prospect, then that is when we would negotiate the final deal, but we have control over. The strategic zoning, since I don't think in the past the county has wanted to do either of those other options, that the strategic zoning was developed so that we could work with landowners to go ahead and rezone their property. The moment that property is rezoned from agriculture to industrial, it goes up 3 or 4 times, right? So they didn't want to pay the extra taxes on it, but we had no mechanism to really get property zoned other than that. And I tell you, it's the hardest economic development because you got to put these things together with cat hair molasses. You got to work with local landowners who some do. We've got some really sharp ones. Linda Allen, who's the Holiday Excel site, is as bright as they come. But some don't understand the process. So that's why the program was developed. But I think in the process, and this has come from me, I don't think there was enough meat on the bones, enough context around them to secure the necessary buffers, to ensure that we do traffic impact analysis, different modelings, because we don't know finally what's going to go on there, but we've modeled some different scenarios to make sure that we're also protecting the community. So I think that program, though I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think it could be improved.
You mentioned designated EDCs and changing the comp plan and the zoning to bring it up to tier 3. Guesstimate costs and time range to achieve that.
Each site is very different. So one site that could have infrastructure nearby might be less. One site might have studies already done on it. They may not. But what we do through the tiering system is it's very cheap to get these sites tiered to at least understand what, there's a difference in having them ranked. Let me say that. Like the state will rank them for less than $5,000 a site through a local engineer, a verified engineer like a Timmons or a Draper or Dewberry. They'll rank them. But then to get them to that tier 3, that study is going to tell you everything you need to do. Like let's say tomorrow a site is a tier 1. The analysis is done. It says to get it from a tier 1 to a tier 3, it's going to cost $50,000. It's not that cheap. But on another property, it could be $1 million. So it just depends on a lot of things, including where the property is located, transportation infrastructure, studies, utility infrastructure. So each site is going to be different to get it from a tier 1 to a tier 3, and then from a tier 3 to a tier 5.
Now, when you're talking infrastructure, are you including the Virginia Power delivery capacity and production capacity?
They look at all of that, yes, sir. Typically, for the right end user, Dominion will run the infrastructure, but they look at the cost if they wouldn't to get it to the site. Yeah.
So they're at the table. The EDA.
The engineering groups who are selected by the state, which is I think 3 or 4 engineering groups, work with our local utilities departments, our providers at the state like Dominion or the local cooperatives to identify those needs. Yes.
Okay, and one quick question. You threw out workforce housing. Comment, please, if that should be part of a requirement for future development, residential developments, workforce housing. How do you define it, and what are your recommendations in a proposed development?
I use the word workforce housing. Affordable housing gets a horrible rap. But I think at the end of the day, and maybe sometimes it can mean something and mean something to someone else, but at the end of the day, when I refer to workforce housing, nothing's affordable. I mean, a townhouse here in Hanover costs you close to $400,000. So we don't have places. Companies more than ever also want to be close to their workforce. So we have a nice commuting pattern here, so you can get, 30 minutes, you can get, 20, you can go 28 miles and get there in 30 minutes, right? So it's not like you're in DC, but still, if you look at the analysis that was provided, 78% of our new workforce, these new jobs we're creating, are coming from outside the community. So they're coming from the Henricos, the Chesterfields, the Luisas, the New Kents. And so that works right now, but at some point, companies are going to say, I want my workforce to be closer. They're happier. Millennials, Xers, I'm a millennial, but the Xers and the Ys and the Zers, they're just a unique breed. They're a unique group of people. And I said that, but at the end of the day, they have a different way they want to live, and employers know that. Now, some projects, they can work from home if they're office projects, but at the end of the day, those other we have a lot of blue-collar, industries here in Hanover. They want them to be closer to their workforce.
How do you define workforce housing?
I don't know. I mean, other than affordability from the perspective of people who work in these blue-collar operations that are hardworking people, whether it's a teacher or whether it's a fireman or a policeman. That's a good word for it. I mean, you can use the word affordable, but I think the word affordable, it can be used out of context at times too. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of places for people who are making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year to live. And that might not be a problem for us today, but it will be a problem for corporations who are going to make decisions on where they locate. Because they're going to want to know they've got right now it works, but in the future they want to know that they can pull from a labor force that's relatively close by. I don't know if I did a great job answering that question.
Well, a lot of what you have said probably answers what I was going to ask, but I was just going to ask you, let's just say today you were thinking about developing one of these areas.
Yes, ma'am.
What areas would you recommend from what you've seen that we have lost would be appropriate?
All of them. No. Oh, no, that's a great question. And thank you for the consideration. What I will say is that since we have hardly any product, we could keep submitting the town of Ashland's 286 acres site for projects because we don't have any sites that are over 50 acres that are competitive, that are that tier 3 or above. So I would say that even our proposed emerging employment hubs, Hanover Progress is not in the short term realistic. So I think anybody who says we're going to, and Steve's nodding his head, so in the short term, if anybody says that we're going to get it there tomorrow, it's unrealistic. But these few other areas, this Brooks Selwyn site right here, and probably $10, $15 million to get the right infrastructure there. But at the end of the day, this has been zoned, a portion of that property has been zoned for 20 plus years. This is an area that we should be looking at. It actually was zoned when the first semiconductor wave hit, the Motorola's and those things. Now that changed, right? The market changed. But these green areas are very few. I mean, honestly, the two areas that are probably, the Pole Green Corridor is great, but there's no economies of scale there, so you don't have a lot of area to develop major greenfield sites. The two areas that I say are our lowest hanging fruit are Mountain Road and then our Creighton Road Gateway. Those are the two areas I think and that's not that much property. I mean, if you take 1,500 acres plus 600 acres, and some of that's not developable, so we're really not proposing anything too progressive here.
So economically, that would be a good way to start, is what you're thinking, economically as well as...
Yeah. From a financial perspective, from a funding perspective, and look where they are too. So anybody who said they're going to be a huge drain on our local services they're positioned right on the boundary of this property. If it was developed, 90% of the traffic would go back into Henrico, right? You can build the necessary buffers. You can build the appropriate infrastructure. Is actually pretty close by on Mountain Road.
It's there.
Yeah, thank you. Made my point. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Now, then my second question was about the money, which we talked about coming from taxes. Let's say we were developing something like that, what do you think our taxes would go up substantially to do this, or do we have other methods? Do we have any money somewhere else that can start these projects for us?
So the short answer is there's many different mechanisms and ways. One would be to float a bond. I don't think that's going to happen here, but it's done in many places. They've done it in Southside Virginia, where they know they need to make sure that they get that infrastructure in place. I don't think your taxes would go up significantly. We also can build economic development deals where, let's say a data center showed up and was going to invest, let's just say $1 billion. Well, if that spends off $10 million a year in new net new tax revenues, what the goal would be is to pay that, like let's say we've got to get that infrastructure to that site. Look, it's going to cost $50 million. But what I could justify would say is we'd get that money, we'd pay that infrastructure off within 5 years of that new tax project. So all that money in the first, we could build our performance agreement to say all that money would go back to this project to pay the infrastructure off. I'm sorry, Steve, I know. You cut me, I'm just trying to answer questions, buddy. I apologize. But at the end of the day, we would pay that off with the funding that we would generate for some of these projects. It's not difficult, actually.
Pay as you go a little bit to be ahead of it, to keep, you're behind, but still you're keeping up.
Yeah, and then the board, if they decide, if the board say go tomorrow, we could appropriate money for economic development and infrastructure.
Linda, we've had these sidebar talk discussions before that, and one of the things that, as I was looking at it and thinking about it, and Larry touched on it, and so did Alan, but Patty just now mentioned the white elephant in the room, so to speak, the money issue. And it's going to cost money to do all the infrastructure, get all this stuff ready and everything, but it doesn't cost us a dime to identify locations. And that's really what we're trying to do with this group here, is identify some of those things with your help and what needs to be done. And some of this is marketing 101. I mean, the bottom line is you've got to have product ahead of time in order to market that. Now, I mean, I don't care if you're selling widgets. If you don't have widgets with you in your car, you're not going to sell any widgets. But you have a number of widgets in your car, and you're going to try to sell those. You're going to sell some, and then that's going to start compounding itself. The other thing is, as far as the economic aspect of it, yeah, it's going to cost some money up front, but the idea is to, on the back end, you're going to be recovering some of that money because of the taxes that are going to be gained from those industries and those organizations.
Correct.
It's imperative, and it also kind of it's the same concept of what Mr. Ashley has talked about. We need to discuss and identify, we're not spending money, identify where the parks could go, identify some of those things. I mean, those are the same types of things that I think that is worthwhile here.
The only thing I say to that, and you're exactly right, because this exercise is to identify them. We cannot forget that they are just identified and they are not competitive until we have those studies done, and this is going to take years. Let me make clear, this isn't overnight. But I cannot market a site that says, here's a circle on a map, one day we hope to get infrastructure there in 15 years. The company's going somewhere else.
The first step is identify.
Agree.
If you don't, you're never going to get off the dime.
I just had to say it because I don't get the opportunity very much, Steve. Thank you.
But what I would say, Mr. McDonald did, and so did Mr. Waddell. I've been here for a while, and I've heard that started off affordable housing, and then it came to workforce housing, and maybe y'all got we need another name for that now, because I haven't seen it either since I've been here.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. And you can call it what you want. I mean, let's say this, you can come up with the next new buzzword for it, but at the end of the day, there are not, let's just say what it is, there are not enough places for hardworking people to live. And that's not my decision to make, but it is a fact. And so, thank you. I don't know if that was a statement or a question, but I think you're right, yeah.
And $44,000, I heard that figure. We got waitresses and fast food people, janitors, and all those people, they don't get $44,000.
And I'll tell you this, you know what our median annual wage is in Hanover? It's approximately, now we're proud that we've helped that grow over the last 5 or 6 years, but so has inflation increased. So let me add that. But then we're proud that we've helped facilitate the creation of better jobs in the community, but $51,000 approximately is our median annual average wage. You know, if one, and that's the median. Imagine there's a lot of people below that, but how do they afford even a condo, you know?
One quick question. I think it was Pennsylvania County you mentioned had the fund. Do you know if Mecklenburg has the same type of fund, have that in Microsoft?
Yeah, they're all working together as a community. RIFAs are, I don't have time. It's a fascinating concept. No matter where the project went, whatever community it went in, ever how much you invest, that's how much tax revenue. Like if one community only can afford to invest 20%, they would generate 20% of that project, even though it was sitting in Pennsylvania County or it was sitting in Mecklenburg. So there's creative ways to do it, but that's for another day. That would take me a long time to walk through it.
Well, Linwood, we told you that the CPT wanted you to come. I'm sure we could have kept asking you questions for another hour, but your time is done. So thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us, and it's very helpful as we plan, land use, economic development, utilities, everything with comprehensive plan. So
Don't wait so long to have me back. Thank you. And thank you for all you guys are doing. This is tough. Yeah, this is tough. And thank you for the citizens who are here too. I think everybody has valid concerns. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. Just so you know, I'm Steve Herzog, Director of Public Utilities. With me today in the very back is Matt Ellinghaus. He's Deputy Director of Public Utilities. And thank you for inviting us. And one thing I'll just add, I think when Linwood was saying infrastructure, he was talking water and sewer a lot. He's also talking transportation, power, gas, internet. But we're a big part of that, and we work with Linwood all the time, and we work very well together. A lot of our recent successes where Linwood's saying we're running out of space, those are areas, I've been with the county for 26 years now. Those are areas that when I started here, we were starting to run infrastructure into. Public utilities, in terms, we were a very small utility, and some of the things we're doing today would be amazing to people 30 years ago. And now we're a very small, medium-sized utility. Just a little background there. So we were given some questions that we were asked to answer, and I thought I'd start off, what does public utilities do? And I always joke that I wish we were called the Water and Sewer Department, because we get calls about gas, telephone, electricity, you name it. We are the Water and Sewer Department. We operate and manage the county's water and sewer system, primarily within the suburban services area. And there was a lot of discussion about funding for infrastructure. And public utilities is an enterprise fund, and we're a self-supporting enterprise fund. And what that means is the way we pay our costs, and that's the cost of expanding our infrastructure, renewing our infrastructure, but is by charging our customers. We have about 22,000 customers that are current, and they get user fees. And then we're adding new customers. I think Hanover's growing at about 1% a year. So we add new customers every year, and those new customers pay capacity fees, sometimes called connection fees. So when a new house is built or a new business is built, they write a check for some of those investments. And then we have some other fees for some other services we provide. But the biggest part of our fees, the biggest part of our revenues is our user fees. The next biggest is capacity fees. Those are the big two. Yes. So I just want to say, public utilities, we do construct a lot of major infrastructure, but I always say we only construct the skeleton of the utility system. We'll do plants. We try to build capacity at plants. We'll build water pump stations, wastewater pump stations. We'll build some of the major, big, huge water lines and some of the big sewer lines. But then a developer, a property owner, someone else, they come in and they connect to where we end and they run to their property. We're asked all the time by citizens, at least I'm asked all the time by citizens, how come you're running water and sewer to this new development over there? I've been here for 40 years and I could use it too. And it's like, well, we're not running that. It's the property owner, it's the developer. They're paying for that infrastructure. They sell a house to someone, the cost of that infrastructure ends up in someone's mortgage and they pay for it over 30 years. We are not set up to fund the infrastructure that would be needed to support all of those EDZs that were just pointed out in the immediate future. Our plan is, to everyone's point, is to serve them over the long term. But that long term is long term. It's not in the near term. So our near term focus, because we have a core, and then we have these areas on the peripheral of the suburban service area that are growing. to be able to serve those, we have to actually strengthen our core, because our growth areas are nowhere near where our source of water, our source of wastewater treatment are. So we have to move water and wastewater through areas that are already developed. So we are investing a lot of resources right now in just strengthening that core so we can be in a position to serve development as it expands out. And I think maybe you'll see that a little bit on the next slide. Hard to see, but outlined in yellow here is the suburban services area boundary. In blue on this map is our existing water system. And if you just look at it visually, you'd say, well, less than half of our suburban services area currently has water and sewer in it. And we've been working basically on the same area, growing the same plan since the 80s. So this is how much progress we've made in 40 years. We have a ways to go, and we're doing that on a pay-as-you-go. These areas in pink, which are also on this map, those are private water systems that existed really before the county had its interconnected major water system. On the water side, we typically talk about peak usage. So our peak usage so far has been about 14 million gallons a day. We currently have a capacity on the water side of about 20.2 million gallons a day. So you can see we have a nice little buffer there currently. And forgetting our little sources of water, our big sources of water are the Doswell Water Treatment Plant, which is located up here. It's a 4 million gallon a day plant. The city of Richmond, we have a 20 million gallon a day contract with them. We don't have the ability to take 20 million gallons a day of water right now, but we have contractually the ability to do that. And then Henrico, that we have a very small amount of water. It's about 785,000 gallons of water a day that we can take from them under our contract. And this is a similar map. This is our sewer system. In green, you can see our existing sewer system. Again, less than half of our suburban services area as planned currently has sewer available to it. We have 4 major plants and 1 small plant. We have the Ashland wastewater treatment plant. It's 2 million gallons a day. We have the Doswell wastewater treatment plant. It's a 1 million gallon a day facility. We have Totopotomy, which is our largest wastewater treatment plant. It's a 7 MGD, 7 million gallon a day plant. And then we have a contract with Henrico County that allows us to send them up to 5.4 million gallons a day on average. And up here you see current usage, 8.3 million gallons a day, capacity 15.4 million gallons a day. Water is all interconnected, and we can put bigger pipes in, put pump stations in to move water. Sewer is not quite like that. Sewer, we have service areas for each of these plants. So you see here, we say we have a big difference there. But we have capacity here in Totopotomy available. We have capacity here in Henrico available. You can see we're very limited in the town of Ashland, and we're very limited up in the Doswell area. And that's just sort of a snapshot of what we look like today. So a little bit about how we do our planning. Over the years, I've had a lot of comments about how the comp plan's done for the benefit of public utilities, and I can assure you that is not true. We are responsive to the comprehensive plan. So in our world, when the county adopts a new comprehensive plan, we look at the new comprehensive plan and try to see how it impacts the utility system. And we have developed what we call our Water and Wastewater Facilities Master Plan. We call it for short FMP, for Facilities Master Plan. This is our current Facilities Master Plan. It was completed after the last comprehensive plan update. The comprehensive plan that we're currently operating under was, I think, adopted either in late 2017 or early 2018. And we finished this up in January of 2021. It was a large effort. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So after the comp plan's updated, if we believe that the changes that were made to the comp plan impact the utility system that we have planned under this document, we'll update that. And it will be a significant effort for us. So we talked a little bit about our current capacity. We're always looking out in the future. So, you know, I'd say 10 years is tomorrow as far as we're concerned. I tell Linwood helped me there because I always say Linwood is like if the board decided that we need to go to this area here and they said we're willing to use every power we have, we're willing to condemn property, which we do not like doing in Hanover, and I respect that. Now I'm just saying that. I'm just saying, and we're willing to do that, and you know everything goes perfect. We've had this discussion. It'll be 10 years before we would be there. And a great example of that is I'll call it the Route 33 EDZ area there. Back in 2007, 2008, different board than we have now, but that board decided in conjunction with the county administrator, public utilities, the economic development director at that time, that was going to be the next area that we should push to. And the board asked us to move forward, and we did. And it was about 2016 when we completed the last project associated with pushing water and pushing sewer out into that area. And so since 2016, it's been sitting there. And I always like to say I can count on no hands how many sewer customers that are connected to that system out there. I don't need any fingers. And I believe I can count on 2 hands how many new water customers are out there. So this kind of goes to the, you know, if we invest, they will come discussion we had a little bit. So, you know, how do you have payback? And I only share that with you because, you know, people need to come. Things change. Maybe we have different plans about that area than we had then, and it takes time. And I know I've spoken with the board about this at one of their meetings where, you know, if you make this decision today, it will be a different board. You might still be on the board, but it will be 10, 12 years from now. That will be before we're ready to do anything with that decision. So again, utilities are long-term. Yes, Linwood.
I do want to add that I think it's important to note that those plans to run that infrastructure, sites were not truly identified and zoned accordingly. So it was run, and I do commend John and Joanne and the board for combining our master utilities plan and our transportation plans and our land use plans, because they identified the corridor long-term, but there was really no component of identifying those properties that the county at the time was willing to zone and prepare for economic development. So I think as we move forward and we build our strategies, we also need to build those strategies around zoning and economic.
I would say, so again, if we have more control over sites is I think what Linwood's saying. So on the water side, I said we have the ability to take 20 million gallons a day from the city of Richmond. Right now, we can take 15.4. We have in the next 5 to 10 years plans to expand our Lockwood wastewater pump station up to the 20 MGD capacity, which will give us about 24.8 million gallons a day capacity. And again, this is just to give you an idea. We're estimating right now that project will cost about $9 million. That's an existing facility. We're just putting in bigger pumps and making some improvements there. And then after that, and this has been studied since before I came to work here. It used to be the Kersey Creek, our off-site reservoir. There was a bunch of different things, but we're thinking our next new water source is going to be a new water treatment plant on the Pamunkey River, actually just a little bit west of here, with an off-stream reservoir at the Verdon Quarry, and I'll have a map on the next slide to show you how far away that is. And phase 1 would basically give us an extra 11 MGD of capacity, be a new 15 MGD plant. We'd abandon our current 4 million gallon a day Dawsonville water treatment plant. It's estimated that project, just on its own, will take 20 years to design, permit, and construct. So we sort of have to have our crystal ball out and say, when do we pull the trigger on this? And right now, we're thinking it'll be late 2040s before it's needed. So we're thinking, you know, later in the 2020s, we'll have to really get started, even though we've already been working on this project for 15 years, this particular one. And that project's estimated to cost $300 million, just to give you an idea of cost. This is sort of It's a big project. I always like to show it. This is the Verdon Quarry. This is a concept plan. Intake on the Pamunkey River, new water plant close to the suburban services area, then a very long raw water transmission line to the Verdon Quarry where we will have about 4 billion gallons of storage. And all that gets us 15 million gallons a day. It's a big project. The biggest project utilities has undertaken to date has been in about the $30 million range. So this is dollar-wise 10 times more. On the sewer side, we have some low-hanging fruit, and this takes us, we think, through the planning period for the current comp plan update, that 20 years. We can expand the totopotomy plant to 10 MGD at an estimated cost of $66 million. This is where I say we have a lot of big projects that are just strengthening our system where it is. We can expand the Doswell wastewater treatment plant from 1 MGD to 2 MGD at an estimated cost of about $27 million. We're planning on doing totopotomy first, maybe Doswell second, and then in Ashland. And somehow, I guess when we came over here, things messed up. But our plan right now is we're not going to expand that plant. It goes to a very small creek, and we don't know how to really do that. So what we have been doing, and we will continue to do, is we're going to offload flows from the Ashland wastewater treatment plant service area and basically move that wastewater all the way to totopotomy. That is our plan. We've already completed one of those projects. We have another project that as soon as we get some variable frequency drives, which we've been waiting about a year for, and they go into service, we'll be taking about another 150,000 gallons a day of flow off the Ashland plant. So I was asked, we sort of talked and decided, well, let's look at what build out of the suburban services area as it's currently being talked about, which is 2.5 units per acre on the residential side. The whole assumption that only 50% of the suburban services area is developable. You know, what kind of demands could we expect? Just to sort of get us a picture of what that looks like. And up there we have the current peak day capacity on the water side. We saw already current peak day demand. And the build-out peak demand projection is between 20 and 25.3 million gallons a day. If this is our plan. I talked with Nora, and I'm just going to say thank you very much, Nora, because we serve the town of Ashland too. So I got their estimates from their comp plan of what build-out in the town is, so that's included in there. Now this is assuming that we maintain the same kind of residential, non-residential demand, and this is where I always say this isn't supporting the large water user for an economic development. Someone comes in and says, we need 1 million gallons a day of water. That's a lot of water for us in Hanover County. It's a much smaller percentage if you go to, I'll say Chesterfield and Henrico or the city of Richmond. It's a big number for us. And I always say, you know, the one big difference between Hanover and some of these other localities is we have the very small Pamunkey River. We just don't have large water bodies that are right here. So some of our resources are a little bit more limited. But looking at that, and you look at the previous slide, it's like, well, that's in the ballpark. And towards the end of the planning period for this, or our build out, which is just slightly beyond it, you see we start getting to that point where we need another water source. If this were the end of the road, 25, 30 years from now, well, maybe we don't need another water source. And if we don't have a large water user. And the best one for me to use, they're no longer one of our customers, but Barra and Paper, they were our biggest water user before they turned into Cascade. They used over 1 million gallons of water every day, 365 days a year. And they have left. And Cascade is going to use, they're much less than that. And on the sewer side, sort of the same analysis. And what you'd see is total capacity-wise, we have enough capacity, again, to serve that plan, assuming we don't get a huge economic development sewer user. But as I mentioned, sewer capacity is much more specific in terms of location. So when we talk about, I'll call it the EDZ that we're talking about north of Ashland. We talked about expanding the Doswell plant. Well, the most we can do at Doswell right now with current technology and all is add another 1 million gallons a day of capacity. When we did a study of that area, I think we were thinking, well, we probably need to think about 3 or 4 million gallons a day if that area was to fully develop. And so, the long-term plan, and this is why, is to divert all that flow to Totopotomoy. And we have more possibilities for expansion there. And it's also more economical to run one bigger plant than lots of little plants. But the plant expansion itself could happen much faster than all the infrastructure needed to move that area to Totopotomoy. And we talk about getting a straw in the area. Again, we start updating the water and wastewater facilities master plan after the comp plan update's completed. This is just kind of a timeline there. So you can see, assume about 18 months for the comp plan update, 3 months for us to evaluate whether we need to update this document. I'm going to guess it's going to be a $200,000 to $250,000 effort for us to update it. So it's not something we undertake lightly because our customers are going to pay for it. And we always are looking out for them. Depending on where everything falls, we then have to budget for it because it's not something that is just sitting there in our budget waiting to spend. So that can take 6 to 18 months to get the funds budgeted for it. And then we actually have to do the update, which can take a year to 18 months depending on how significant those changes are. And I just show this because you can kind of see, well, if things go as badly as they can in terms of schedule, we're finishing up just before it's time to update the next comp plan. Here's year 5, there's 3 months left. We ended up in here somewhere with our last update because it can be shortened up like that. So some key takeaways I just wanted to leave you with. One is we have adequate capacity in that big picture way if trends continue through the 2040s. Unless we have an economic development user of water and sewer that's much larger than normal. The small businesses, all those things that we always support, they're built into our numbers, but it's hard to predict someone who comes in because Linwood, we get the call like, hey, can you provide 4 million gallons a day of water? Can you provide 2 million gallons a day of water? And I say 9 times out of 10, my answer is no. Yeah, it's like, and it's like, or the answer is yes, but it will cost this much money and this many years to get it there. And they're like, that's not on their schedule. We have a lot of sites where we can provide 500,000 gallons a day. We're very limited where we can get above that. And a lot of the sites where we can get above that aren't where people want to be right now. And it's not where our plan proposes them being. Big idea just for you to walk is not every parcel is served under our plan. We put in the major infrastructure. We then look to the property owners, the development community to run the last mile or the last 2 miles. And that happens. If you look at this, it's just a skeleton of a system. It's not all filled in. And our plan doesn't include going into existing neighborhoods right now. And I'll just say, the way our rates are set up and all, they're not set up to support that kind of infrastructure. Sometimes we happen to run major infrastructure through an existing neighborhood. And I always like to say some people feel like they won the lottery because they're like, good, I can hook up now. I've been having problems with my drain field. And some people feel like it's the end of the world because their life that they've enjoyed, we're disrupting it. And they also know that public utilities is usually the first thing that occurs before an area changes. You got to have water, you got to have sewer, or nothing's going to happen. So we're also like the first ones knocking on the door saying your life that you've learned to love might be changing. And some people are very happy, and again, some people aren't. Building infrastructure takes time. So a fast project for us is 3 or 4 years. What people say, boy, that's pretty simple. How come it's 3 or 4 years? And then the last thing is, the 2 big challenges always, and we've hit on this a little bit earlier, is funding. How do we pay for it all? There's, I think, this is an old number, but I'm just going to, there's like $1 billion of infrastructure between this plan and some of our capacity projects. And I say that kind of loosely because if you were to add up everything, it would be smaller than that. But in the last 12 months, costs have gone up 50%, 100%. It's a crazy world right now. We're not in a position, and the county's not in a position, we don't have $1 billion. And then it takes manpower, it takes resources to design, it takes resources to construct, and then it takes people to operate. These systems don't go on their own. We're out there all the time. So with that, I think I'm done, and I'd be happy to take any questions you have, and maybe we can tag team.
The presentation was amazing. It was really eye-opening. First of all, I can tell you all really do a good job of planning out the finances and things.
We try, thank you.
It really is. It's amazing. So I can see where economic development will be a challenge, and that's why that pre-planning is probably a really good idea, isn't it? Because they really need to know what to do to get ready for that. So thank you.
Steve said it will take years, so we better start now.
I'd like to echo Ms. Thomas's thank you to both of y'all, and a special thank you to both of you for taking the time individually when I've asked my many questions. My Colombo impression, just one more question. But I do have a few questions. The new high school and middle school in Henry on Route 360, how will that be served, water and wastewater?
So I'm going to say, I don't want to get ahead of anyone, but I'm going to say the plan is to serve it with public water and public sewer. They're located in an area that we're not currently in, and again, I always like to say, it's like the end of the world as far as I'm concerned is where the suburban services area is. So it's like I don't know, there's something out there, but it doesn't exist. So people come talk, but obviously when we're talking about county facilities, we've been involved. So. And I don't want to get ahead. I think the current comp plan and the way it is public facilities like that outside of the suburban services area can be served with public utilities. So we have a couple examples of that. I'll just say Polgreen.
I think what he was asking is where is it coming?
Yeah.
It's coming down 360.
So the answer. Well, the answer is that's how we think it's coming. It's most likely going to come down 360. It could potentially, so I'll say it could potentially come through your front yard, going down Polgreen Road. So because both those are potential, but I'm going to say, the school's a way away, and we've looked at it, and I'll just say, today we're thinking it's going to make the most sense to have a force main, have a pump station down at the school site, pump up 360 all the way to Beaver Dam Creek. So it's going a ways. And then we're thinking we would extend a water line down 360. And there's details, and there'd be probably a tank and perhaps a pump station on the school site to provide primarily fire protection. It's like, serving the school for its day-to-day uses, and whether those facilities will be.
I think that answers the question. I'm sorry, but the planning commission has a hard stop because they have a meeting, so I want to be able to get around to everybody's questions.
That's okay.
And we still have a session.
Linwood just went on too long. What can I say?
I didn't ask the question.
I'm not, but in respect.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I'd like to just say, I'm glad you
Did you jump over me?
He just skipped you.
He did. I mean, he did.
Chairman's prerogative.
I just have one quick question. You talked about getting water from Richmond. You got different water sources, but is that what you said?
We have City of Richmond, right. We have Henrico County, big picture, and our Dawsville water treatment plant.
Right. So my question goes back to more what Linwood said. We missed a project because we didn't have diversification of water. but that sounds like we do.
I think, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of regional cooperation at the, say, in utilities. And I think what Linwood was saying is we missed opportunities because they were looking at this site, and the answer is we don't have that much water at this site. And maybe I
think what Steve noted, which I think probably a little different page there, is that, you know, the plan is for users in economic development that may not need significant amount of water. That's the general long-term strategy. My feedback would be is let's plan for those users that we're losing where it makes sense, those competitive projects. Let's have the plan, let's invest those dollars, let's be more aggressive in those projections and those funding so we can win those deals, because I've got a sheet of how we've lost all of these big projects, and most of them have to do with utility infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming out.
You're welcome.
I'll kick you next.
But anyway, I just wanted to tie back into what you said, that Route 33 corridor, that is very problem. And I think a lot of it is like Mr. Hager said, we didn't identify those areas what they were going to be. So that now we got developed. We paint yellow on the map 20, 30 years ago, but there's no infrastructure to support it. So in the meantime, housing builds up. It's pretty much a rural area. So when you try to start injecting high density into it, it doesn't go over very well. So then we're struck with what we had. So I just want to say that. And I really appreciate y'all coming in. I think it really give us a better picture of what we need to look at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just had a fast comment, that's really quick. When we were talking about affordable housing, thank you for your presentation. The one thing, every housing event that I've attended is that the developers are saying if we really want to be serious about it, they like to see the utilities in place. And so I don't know what role this would play, this plan might play in that, but if there was an area that we were identifying, I mean, that's like the one common theme that they're saying as to why that's holding them back from other localities. I'm sure you guys are hearing that too, but that was just a comment. Workforce housing, not affordable, right?
Thank you.
One more, Mr. Chairman.
I'm more, I'm not sure how much
One more,
time
one
she needs. So.
quick question, quick answers, please.
Can we pull water from Lake Anna?
No.
All right, that was a short one, that was good.